Welcome back, everybody, to the Peer-to-Peer Policy Pod. I am Brian Morgenstern. Remember to follow me on X at MorgensternNJ. Follow the pod on Rumble, YouTube, Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. This week, we have a very special guest, my buddy Alex Thorn, Head of Firmwide Research at Galaxy. Zach, why don't you take it away? We can get started.
All right. Well, Alex, welcome to the show, and thanks for joining us today. And as Brian said, you are the head of firm-wide research at Galaxy. So for our viewers, what is Galaxy and what is your role there?
Yeah, thanks, Zach and Brian, for having me on. Love this podcast. It is head of firm-wide research, which I think is an interesting, very kind of Goldman-esque type of title. And it's because Galaxy is a very diversified financial services firm with both buy and sell side businesses, investment banking business, on-chain stuff, a data center business, and I'm responsible for coordinating research efforts across the entirety of the organization. So I'm not head of research for the asset manager or head of research for the trading business, but instead we have one unified team that I oversee. And what we do is we produce analysis and insights, mostly about digital assets, but increasingly and soon, which I'm sure we'll talk about data center businesses for internal and external stakeholders. So that means for the purposes of research and development, R&D, for product design and product marketing research internally. But also we publish either directly to our clients and counterparties and also sometimes publicly written research content. So in that part of that type of content looks a lot sort of like investment research from a sell side research group. However, we don't sell securities. We don't write about securities, right? So we mostly write about cryptocurrency markets, technology, trends, and adoption. And yeah, we produce stuff directly, again, for internal privately, to clients directly privately, but also a lot of stuff publicly. And then just as that team, part of the internal stakeholding support that we do includes, I'm on the investment committee and I'm the treasurer of our corporate political action committee. I'm on the token approval committee, right? We support a lot of sort of various like corporate level initiatives as well.
That's great. Well, so big digital asset focus. I know you've been in this game probably even longer than I have. Why don't you tell the viewers a little bit, how did you get interested in this space at all to the point that you're dedicating your career to it?
Yeah, I mean, I worked at Fidelity Investments from when I graduated from college until the end of 2020. So 12 years. Across a range of roles in legal and compliance. And later I was head of blockchain research and started Avon Ventures, which is the early stage crypto VC for the owners of Fidelity, right? So it wasn't balance sheet capital. We were Fidelity employees, but it's a different vehicle over that career. And so I was working in Fidelity Legal in e-discovery and forensic investigation in like a while ago. And when the Euro made, I was going to say 2012, 13 is when I recall, but one of the first things that really got me interested, it wasn't, I don't think the first time I ever heard about Bitcoin, but it was the Euromaidan protests in the Ukraine. Stuff really comes full circle, which is crazy. There were activists then, right? This was the pro-democracy protest, I think against Viktor Yanukovych, I believe. They called him the Chocolate King, who was the pro-Russia strongman leader of Ukraine at the time. And there were democracy protests that ultimately resulted in his overthrow or new elections or whatever, which is sort of the precursor now to then Putin taking Crimea and then later the conflict there, right? Which is sort of Russia trying to get its influence back in Ukraine. Anyway, at that time, there were protesters holding up QR codes saying, donate to this color revolution, right? The Euromaidan in Bitcoin. And I was like, what is Bitcoin? What is that? Because I was really interested in, encryption and, as a forensic investigator, computer investigations, networking, stuff like that, sort of a hacker by hobby growing up and less like network penetration, which is what I think people think of when they think about what a hacker is, but sort of in the generic sense, like I learn about computers by breaking them, right? Like hacking into them, figuring them out, like whether physically or in software. So not a coder. So anyway, I looked into that and thought it was really cool, got interested in it. That was my first exposure. It's when I first recall going down the rabbit hole on Bitcoin, was seeing that. And then, fast forward now, Alex Gladstein from the Human Rights Foundation is a good friend of mine. He did that. He was the one helping them back then accept Bitcoin. And so things do come full circle. Anyway, I got interested. Fidelity leadership eventually got interested, looked around the company and said, who at our company knows about this? I was discovered that I knew about this because I've been yapping people's heads off all around Fidelity for several years at that point. And, eventually I became head of blockchain research and the rest is history. And I joined Galaxy in January 2021.
Very cool. Very
That's the
cool.
whole
And
story all at once.
yeah, no, it's wild. And you did it concisely, which is also impressive. You have a cool podcast called Galaxy Brains. I first kind of got exposed to it, I think, your pod at least, watching you rap.
Yeah.
And you're actually really good. How did you find out that you were a good rapper? How did you get
Yeah.
into that? And then we'll give you a chance to plug the pod. What do you want people to know?
Yeah, I appreciate that, Brian. I am indeed an excellent rapper. I want to just state that unequivocally now. I've been writing rap music and recording it since I was a freshman in high school. So in fact, I'd taken several sort of years off being too busy before I started several years ago rapping the introduction to every Galaxy Brains episode. So, and also during that time, I got really into digital audio production, and I play the piano and the guitar and the drums in my life, and got really into like using MIDI keyboards. So I made every beat that we rapped on those as well. I have like hundreds and hundreds of beats. Now I was just doing this as a hobby. I never had before Galaxy Brains really never had publicly released any music, but had recorded hundreds of songs and even more instrumentals. Right. So, for like the first like 85 episodes of Galaxy Brains, I rapped the intro, usually about what the topics would be and who the guests would be, different time every episode. I don't actually do it every episode anymore. I did do one a couple months ago. I did a song with El Captain Youth, a great Bitcoin rapper, right on the eve that we released on the eve of the halving last, what was that, last April, I guess, or when the halving happened. So we still do a little bit. Galaxy Brains is a markets and crypto podcast, mostly Bitcoin and markets and policy focused. You know, we talk with my friend Bimneta BB from Galaxy Trading every episode about literally short-term market update, like, because we're talking every week, right? And then I have guests on from around the industry.
Nice. Nice. Well, similar subject matter. We like to cover a lot of public policy, business trends, political trends, how this is going to affect Bitcoin, the companies that are building in and around the Bitcoin network. So why don't we get into a few of the recent public policy developments? Zach, you want to kick that off?
Sure. And please do check out the Galaxy Brain podcast wherever you get podcasts. You guys do a great job. So kind of shifting over to the substantive stuff, we had a lengthy summer recess. Congress is now back, so liberty is at risk once more. But one of the top issues that the Senate needs to tackle this fall is market structures. The House passed out the Clarity Act earlier this year. The Senate's kind of doing their own thing through two committee processes. The framework of what they're talking about, do you think it's important for Bitcoin at all, or is it just altcoins? And then what do you think are sort of the main issues that the House and the Senate need to resolve going forward?
Yeah, great question. I would say at the core, for mostly what's sort of being debated, it much more affects non-Bitcoin digital assets than Bitcoin. Bitcoin, very firmly commodity. Indeed, the only one that former chair Gary Gensler said was a commodity. And so a lot of the market structure sort of at the highest level is debate, and legislation is determining which types of digital assets are which types of legal things, commodities, securities, maybe something else like a stable coin, and which market regulator should have jurisdiction over them. And then in the case of taking a step further, if they do have jurisdiction, what does that regulation and oversight look like, right? So that's the core of the question. And when it comes to Bitcoin, most believe that Bitcoin is a commodity. The US government has said now pretty definitively for years that it's a commodity. So there's not a lot of question to be resolved about if one or the other market regulator, right? In the US, we have two market regulators, one that does futures, commodities, derivatives, right? And one that does securities, and that's actually extremely irregular in the world. Almost every other market has, including every other advanced market, has one single markets regulator. But that really matters here because, should the SEC oversee Bitcoin markets, right? And so there's a lot of question about that. And I would say and there's plenty of nuance there about like whether the CFTC should actually have any spot oversight authority that I feel strongly about. But that's the core of the broad question: who, under what circumstances, and how should regulate which digital assets? I would say there are things that matter a lot to Bitcoiners that will be in this legislation outside of that core question. For example, protections for developers, a Blockchain Regulatory Clarity Act, which explicitly states that open source devs aren't money transmitters is an important one. I think the new Senate draft goes even further. There's the Keep Your Coins Act, which explicitly enshrines the right to self-custody in federal law. Things like that matter to Bitcoiners, I think, definitely. So there is stuff that matters for Bitcoiners in here. But at that core question about who regulates what assets, when, and how, I don't think there's it's a much bigger deal for non-Bitcoin digital assets like altcoins. I would say, like, one of the key things that this bill does is it puts spot market authority firmly in the CFTC's jurisdiction. And that is kind of crazy, in my opinion, separately. And it's sort of the result of this push and pull. Like, I asked Commissioner Hester Peirce about this once, and she was like, "You're not wrong, Alex, but like, people just want crypto spot exchanges overseen. So like, if not the CFTC, then would it be the SEC?" And I think the industry rightly prefers that if it's a spot commodity, it be CFTC. But I would say that is a net change. Like, right now, there is no national markets regulator overseeing Bitcoin spot markets. Indeed, the CFTC itself doesn't oversee any spot markets. Like, think about it. It would actually be crazy if they did, because take corn. Okay, the CFTC regulates corn futures and options on corn commodities, sure, or gold. But where is the spot market for corn, right? Like, there is no central spot market, right? What about gold? There is no gold. I mean, is it, NYMEX, or is it like a pawn shop in India? Like, it trades everywhere. Or oil, even a more ridiculous example, literally controlled largely by a cartel, right? It is. How could you prevent market manipulation in the market for gold or oil? Like, these are geopolitical commodities, right? By definition, they can be manipulated, and often are, by geopolitical powers, right? Like, that's how they work. So you couldn't oversee spot oil. It's not possible. Bitcoin is similar in that regard. It is traded everywhere globally all the time. It's not like a security. Securities tend to only trade on the single exchange upon which the issuer has allowed them to trade. So you just surveil that exchange and bam, you've covered it. Apple's on the New York Stock Exchange. We regulate the New York Stock Exchange, and all trading of Apple is now like overseen by the SEC because they regulate the one exchange where it trades. It's just not true for commodities. So it's, to me, this is somewhat problematic. Like, the CFTC has no experience regulating spot commodities. So that could affect Bitcoin in the US. On the other hand, almost every jurisdiction regulates crypto exchanges in some way. Okay. Like, they're usually called VASPs, virtual asset service providers, or DASPs. Like, so it's not, and this was Commissioner Peirce's point, was like, it's not crazy that like they'd be overseen. It's just, to me, like, on that split, that jurisdictional split, there is actually a net new thing for Bitcoiners here. I don't think it matters that much. I happen to be opposed to it, but it's probably going to happen, and I don't think it will affect Bitcoin that much. It's the other stuff in there that matters more for Bitcoin: dev protections, custody stuff. There could be proof of reserve stuff in there that could be relevant, right? Like, there's sort of like these ancillary things to that core question, and those could affect Bitcoiners.
Yeah, I think I'm on the same page. I think the CFTC, though, has authority to investigate like market manipulation.
Yeah, they do for spot markets. They just never really use it because it's like ridiculous. I think if it was like obvious and it was Americans, like they might use it. Like, it's you're totally right. There can technically be insider trading and manipulation on commodities, legally speaking. I defy people to find many examples of them ever using it. And I think it's because it's pretty impractical. Like, it's not, and also, like, how do you, but that is backwards looking. Yes. To your point. It's not, even though it does exist, it's not like regulating some poor. Imagine a farmer, he rolls up to the market with corn in his back of his pickup truck and sells it to you at a farmer's market. Like, that's a spot corn market. The
Right.
CFTC does not regulate.
I guess the theoretical case, I, like you, think it is unnecessary, but I'm trying to play devil's advocate or whatever, steel man the argument. If we've seen, I think based on real life examples, we've seen that kind of spot market regulation they wouldn't have much to do anyway, because you guys were helping whales unload billions of dollars of Bitcoin consistent with, I think, an estate plan or something like that. So if there were someone, theoretically, they had that insider information that this was going to happen, and so they thought that this large sale was going to affect the price, and then they would trade on that information. Like, there's a theoretical example, although then the price of Bitcoin barely moved even on those huge, massive dumps. So like, pumping and dumping Bitcoin with a market as liquid as it is virtually impossible to manipulate. But I guess you could conjure an example that might eventually be regulated. I think I come down on the same side.
I think that's a fair
It's
point.
unnecessary, but
I think that's
whatever.
a fair point. And I think it's probably unnecessary still. I agree with you, but I think you're right. I mean, I think take Galaxy as the example, right? We're not an exchange, a crypto exchange. I mean, like a Coinbase is, for example, right? But we think under Clarity, we would be what's called a digital commodity dealer, which is overseen by the CFTC. I mean, we think that's fine, right? Like we are in that spot for the 80K whale. We are dealing on the whale's behalf. We're not running a lit order book, which is what an exchange does, but we are acting in the market, right? Sort of. It depends on what the setup is. I mean, I think actually we mostly act as a principal dealer today, which is a little bit different. We're not acting on their behalf, but like legally speaking. But I think it would be reasonable for whether it's an exchange or a dealer for there to be rules that specifically enshrine things like preventing insider trading inside of the organization, or take like accusations that Coinbase has faced in the past. I'm thinking about Bitcoin Cash in particular in the end of 2017. They were not going to list it, they said. And then they eventually did list it. And the price spiked right before they listed it. And there were a lot of accusations that perhaps someone at Coinbase knew they were going to list it, albeit a commodity, right? And maybe traded on it. And so you could imagine that the markets may be able to be made more orderly with some additional regulation. But in general, to me, regulating how a spot exchange for commodities works, it's not that I think it's not necessary, but my main point is that it's net new. It's not something that exists for other spot commodities, right? So that would be an entirely new thing for the CFTC. They have no experience regulating spot commodity exchanges. They do investigate, allegations of manipulation or insider trading. They have that look back power. I think it's just we of course have those controls because we wouldn't be a good partner to work with if we didn't. There are business reasons why we don't, share our clients or counterparties trades with people internally or externally, right? But it's not unreasonable, but to me that is one area where Bitcoin would be net newly regulated on that main jurisdictional question.
So I want to switch topics in a second, but first, just to revisit, are you aware of any big hangups between the House approach versus the Senate approach that they're going to have to work out? It strikes me as sort of political, like educating and then figuring out that voters actually want this and getting more senators. But do you think what are the policy questions that need to be resolved between the House and the Senate, if you have any comments?
I think the core one is the mature blockchain test in the House's Clarity Act versus this ancillary assets test in the Senate, or FIA as it's called, the Responsible Financial Innovation Act. Look, the Senate just released a new draft of the bill with some of their version. It's still only Senate banking people working on it. So it's going to change because they need Senate Ag to work on it too in order to do both CFTC and SEC, but and in fairness, I haven't yet had a chance to compare the new draft to Clarity. We did compare the discussion questions and principles that they put out in end of July or early August to Clarity, and there is this difference in those two tests: ancillary assets in the Senate and mature blockchain in Clarity in the House's Clarity Act are the sort of threshold tests by which a digital asset would be a commodity or a security. And the two bills take a pretty notable different approach, whereas the House is very focused on sort of principles of decentralization, I would say broadly speaking, right? If any of these list of planks is tripped, then it would be a security. And those planks include the software open source. If it's closed source, it can't be a commodity. Do insiders, I think, control more than 20% of the coins? If they do, it can't be a commodity. It must be a security, right? There's a few others, right? Do they control the validator set and all this stuff? I actually think that's a pretty reasonable approach. I mean, some of those numbers are somewhat arbitrary, but they're not bad ones to have picked, in my opinion. It's actually pretty decent. And I think one thing I like about it is that it's explicit and prescriptive, right? So we don't have to you don't have to debate about whether too many people own the coins. You've got a statutory threshold that is either met or not. And that's helpful. That literally is clarity, right? That's pretty clear statutory clarity. I think that those types of statutory thresholds, though, can also result in games. So, for example, you might see a wave of coins where the insiders own 19.99% to avoid being a security, right? So, it is what it is. I think it would be an improvement. It would add clarity. The Senate's version, and this is conceptually kind of confusing, but actually simpler to enact. this ancillary assets idea, it really sort of follows off that Ripple ruling of separating the investment contract from the emanating asset. So you could say that that's sort of where the ancillary comes in, like, right? The sale or offer of the token could be a security, but even if it is, then perhaps the token that results from that investment contract still may not be. So rather than sort of approach it through this broad threshold thing, it sort of focuses more on the offer and sale, sort of rather than the efforts of a third party plank of the Howey test, which is, the mature blockchain test. It's sort of like, well, how big is the third party, right? Like that's sort of what it's all focused around. Honestly, it's a bit like arcane and confusing. I don't think fundamentally, I would say we have a mild preference for the Senate approach, but I wouldn't say it's that strong. And for
The Senate approach? It sounded like the House.
yeah, so I think the House approach is clever and not bad. I think we still prefer ancillary assets more because it's not as prescriptive. It's also, I think, a more innovative. It's easier to incorporate it into the existing body of securities law versus having to sort of like rewrite an entire pile of securities law, which is what mature blockchain tests would probably result in. But again, I would say it's mild. From our perspective as a large service provider, we just want to know that we can operate without being sued for like just doing normal business. And if you tell us we need XYZ license and we're able to get it, then that's fine, right? If you tell us we need a license and then refuse to let anyone to get it, which is kind of what Gensler did, that's a huge problem for us, right? But like, as long as we know what we can legally trade with whom and who we're being overseen by and which licenses we need, like ultimately we'll comply with that. And that would be clarity. I think more than any, honestly, more than any particular policy, we just want to know that the policies exist, that they're codified in federal law so that they can't be rolled back under a future administration, and that they give sufficient clarity so that we don't have to bake in risk and like regulatory risk into our business model planning. Like that at our core. Now, if they're going to write them, then of course we'll input and have preferences here and there. But I would say between that's my understanding of the core differences between those. I think the Senate new draft did just even strengthen the stuff I mentioned, the Bitcoin developer stuff and protections a lot, which is really good. So we're for that. But, otherwise, like I honestly, I'm still handicapping the possibility this even happens before the midterms. I think I still have it at 35%, whereas like Bloomberg says 70%. So there's just not a lot of time. And the Democrats are already signaling they're going to, in the Senate, make a big deal out of DeFi, which is going to be a non-starter depending, basically. So they say you can't use DeFi unless everything's KYC. Like that's going to be a non-starter. That would kill the bill. That's like Senator Mark Warner, who's like big hobby horse. And then, like ethics, right? Like Trump family, like that's it. They made a big narrative push on that. The Democrats in the House, it didn't work. Clarity passed with a veto-proof majority, but Senate's a different animal. I think like it's going to be hard for Republicans in the Senate to vote for something that is tailored specifically against the president and his family. And that's a possibility as well.
So I think that, or at least scuttlebutt that I hear, is that between two big players in the space, Paradigm and A16Z, one prefers the mature blockchain test, the other prefers ancillary assets test. And unless they can kind of come together, it's gonna make it harder even for the Republicans to unify. Is there a path to that happening? Because it's definitely not going to happen if the Republicans don't.
Yeah, I would say yes. Look, in policy circles, it's well known that the mature blockchain test was derived from Miles Jennings' work at A16Z, right? And they push for that. And like I said, I don't dislike it. Like I think it's pretty good. I think the structure of it's good, and the specific numbers, though somewhat arbitrary, I think are also pretty good, to be honest. Like, if it was 26%, I'd be like, well, that's really arbitrary. Why not 25? Right? But like, I mean, they're not excessively high or not excessively low. And then, yeah, Paradigm and Galaxy and Multicoin and some others signed a letter and wrote a letter to the Senate advocating for the opposite approach, the other approach, which is ancillary assets. So it is true that Paradigm and A16Z are on opposite sides of this debate. I don't know, I can't speak for them. And I also actually don't know the extent to which their preferences are strongly held versus mildly. I mean, ours are mildly held, I would say, right? So it's not like, oh no, if it ends up being mature blockchain tests, we're furious. I think we'd be fine with that, to be honest. We're just, while the game's being played, we'll, offer our perspectives. So, but yes, they are on opposite sides.
Yeah. Interesting. All right. Well, always the slight pessimist, I guess, with your handicapping, but hopefully the odds increase fast. it'll take some White House pressure as well.
Yeah.
But I wanted to,
I'd rather be pleasantly surprised, than overly optimistic.
yeah,
It's just my nature.
set the bar low and clear it.
Exactly.
That's my life motto. So I wanted to shift because both our companies are, well, yours is, I think, probably more advanced because you already have a deal set up. You're building AI data centers. You're completely moving away from Bitcoin mining. Riot is still all Bitcoin mining right now. We have capacity. We are shopping, around potentially getting into the AI data center market. So what we're starting to see is that you're seeing some Bitcoin miners go from mining Bitcoin to just pure AI data center operators. And then you also have your hybrids of people just trying to maximize the value of a megawatt and mining Bitcoin potentially as a bridge to AI, building up a capital stack, potentially having both simultaneously going on next to one another, which is what Core Scientific was doing. And now they're going through a process to be acquired by CoreWeave and I guess just be totally AI. But so you have pure Bitcoin miners, you have pure AI, and then you have the hybrid models. Wanted to ask, what do you make of the market reactions to some of these deals as they've been announced? Where do you think things are headed? Just any thoughts in general?
I think it's really exciting. I think it's so funny, like we talking about AI years ago, and I looked at a company, a very small Ethereum miner at the time, and they were like, well, and I was like, what are you going to do when Ethereum moves to proof of stake, like you're a GPU miner? They're like, well, there are other coins, but we're looking at doing some stuff in video rendering. There are other things we can do with the GPUs, including like AI stuff. And we were like, dude, video rendering. Like, I mean, I know that's a market, but I mean, like, come on. And it was a huge miss because that company was CoreWeave that I passed on, like, maybe what was it, 6+ years ago. And I say this as a way to point out that like the AI narrative and reality came upon really fast. Like it is sort of that, I don't know if it was Mid-Journey or the ChatGPT moment, but like only about like 18 months ago did everybody realize like, holy crap, this is actually going to be absolutely massive, like imminently, not just like in some long-term sci-fi future. And then everybody realized that, oh my God, we need so much electricity for this. Like we don't have any electricity. If only there was an industry that had been building out high performance data centers near the world's biggest energy supply for the last 10 years that could help us with this. And I think Bitcoin, obviously, and there was, and it's Bitcoin miners. And I mean, as you know, every possible construction of where and how to mine Bitcoin on what energy source has been done. You've got people capping flares and using flare gas. You got people putting, ASICs on oil rigs to cap them there. You've got people, escaping methane from garbage dumps and doing all this so all those off-grid things. You got strictly solar off-grid. Then you've got like on-grid with fixed price PPAs. Then you've got like Texas energy market where I know Riot and Galaxy are, which is like highly deregulated. So you can like trade that. And like, you've got almost like every type. You got the folks in the TVA that mine on nuclear. Like there's like almost everything's been tried. Right. And rightly so, because the Bitcoin mining market is extremely competitive and has CapEx and you have to differentiate yourself on your engineering, your execution, right? It's like you're going to get the same if you do a good job. Two firms, miners could do, if they have the same hash rate online, they could be doing totally opposite approaches, but they're still going to get the same revenue if they have the same hash rate, most likely, right? So it resulted in a huge dispersion of ways to do it. And then there's this race to the bottom for energy costs. So then it's like the people doing like trying to mine for a negative energy cost if they can get some stranded energy, people on hydro. There's all this diversification. Not all of that can be good for AI, but a lot of those end up being pretty good for AI, not all of them. If you're off grid in a way far away from a good internet line using an old hydro resource as your power source, you're not going to be a big GPU like HPC and AI player because unlike Bitcoin, the AI training and inference need bandwidth, right? So like you can run a whole giant Bitcoin site on like a cell phone's level of bandwidth, but which is one of the reasons you can do it everywhere. You can use Starlink or satellite internet, right? But to serve like high quality, high performance compute to hyperscalers or to the end buyers of those, the Metas and the Facebooks and the OpenAIs and whomever, and the Amazons, you need significant bandwidth. So now you're talking about sites that are near low latency bandwidth sources. Like you need more water probably than you do for ASICs. Like if you're liquid immersion, then you don't need as much water, but you're probably going to need a bunch of water to cool the GPUs. Like there's these factors that make it so that not every site can convert or be repurposed for AI, but many can. That's why you're seeing many people do it. It's resulting in a really interesting dispersion among the miners in the market, many of whom in the US, as you guys know well, both Riot and Galaxy are publicly traded. So it's making, in my mind, for a much more interesting equity landscape, which I think is much needed, or just, welcome. I should say it's very welcome. And I think it's a really exciting time. Like the amounts of electricity. I mean, literally, no one's ever built data centers like a Riot or a Galaxy in the history of the world until like the last, 8-10 years. There's never been, if you look at like DigitalOcean or the sort of normal data center companies that power things like the cloud, or they're what, 100 megawatt sites? Like Bitcoin miners are talking about gigawatt size sites. I mean, you're starting to see that now out of AI, but like there really weren't data centers or people to build data centers with the experience of building with this level of energy that AI requires. So very fortuitous for Bitcoin mining as an industry, but also specifically for some. I think our motivation has always been with our site in Texas. We have an excellent access to low latency fiber and to cheap electricity, right? And it's a great site for mining Bitcoin. It turns out we think it'll be a great site for serving high performance compute, but it requires a lot of work and a lot of money to retrofit, and it's a whole thing. And I think the calculus people are making, and it's again the diversity among the spectrum of miners is so interesting. Like most miners want to maximize the dollar they can earn on a megawatt or a kilowatt or a gigawatt or whatever, and some of them will make more money mining Bitcoin than they'll do HPC, and some will make more money doing HPC than mining Bitcoin. And to your point, Brian, some will do both. I mean, I just think it's very exciting, like, because Bitcoin mining is just a highly competitive, like ruthless, perfectly competitive, I should even say, industry. And like this adds like another layer of like diversity for like stellar teams to emerge and execution to be good or bad or different. Like it's just another interesting vector to distinguish these data center companies.
Yeah, definitely. Well, it went from, mining Bitcoin is just find the cheapest power anywhere, generally, in remote areas, former factory towns, things like that. Now, for AI, you also want cheap power, but it has to be in proximity to usually a population center who are going to be using HPC functions, AI, et cetera. But you need enough land because a Bitcoin mining facility can be modular. It can be whatever you want. AI, you need a lot more space. You need a lot more infrastructure. It's like 10 times the CapEx that goes into it. So yeah, finding these like unicorn sites, I think it's totally changing the way people view these companies. Very, very exciting stuff. But we have some other policy questions. Zach, do you want to take away on the EOs and stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. Technology, as you said, it seems like it's kind of just burst on. I mean, it's been developing, but it's kind of bursting on the scene from a market perspective over the last, as you said, 18 months or so. And then, of course, the policymakers are always moving slower than the technology and the policy does. But the Trump administration, they've released a slew of executive orders so far, reports and things like that. You've got the AI action plan, and then you've got the data center executive order. And then on the Bitcoin side, you had the strategic Bitcoin Reserve executive order, the retirement accounts executive order, and then that big digital asset report. What are your thoughts on some of those executive orders and reports, and what sort of impact have they had so far?
Yeah, I think the administration is very focused on promoting business, broadly speaking, specifically technology business, energy business, digital assets business for sure, maybe others, but those that are relevant here. And you see that in what actions they can take from the White House specifically. The Big Beautiful Bill had some good stuff for energy production, for data center construction, and other sort of large energy project build out stuff. So there's a clear movement. Obviously, the stuff on digital assets has been substantial. I mean, the Genius Act passage, the Presidential Working Group report, the SBR executive order. So I would say broadly, like they're doing a lot, and I think that's really impressive. And they've done a lot in a short amount of time. There's obviously a lot that they can't do solely by executive order, but more is coming, and implementations of things that they've ordered, or legislation that will further push things along, and other policy changes. So I'm very thankful and supportive to the administration for their positive pro-business outlook on these areas that matter to us specifically. So I think one of the ones that I think the AI stuff is very private, meaning like it's done by private companies significantly, right? And it's not like there was 4 years of a Gary Gensler or an Elizabeth Warren standing in the way of it as much. So it's not like clearing a regulatory path, which is something the federal government could do, is the way that it needed to be done for digital assets. And so it's more, you see Trump like announcing like this country is going to put in this much money, or this company is going to spend this much capex on data centers, like, right? And so he's clearly encouraging that. And I think it's important that it be a national priority. I think when it comes to AI, like we don't know exactly where this is going to go in the evolution of this technology, but it's, I think, pretty clear it's going to be not only important for our lives and for business and stuff, but it's going to be geopolitically relevant and strategic. And so it's important, I think, that America lead on that. I think the same is obviously true for Bitcoin, and that's true for Bitcoin mining. I think it's true for Bitcoin, the asset. And I mean, one of the ones that, we and everyone else have been following closely is the strategic Bitcoin reserve, and all the deadlines that Treasury and Commerce had to give to the White House information and all this stuff. And then it's mentioned in the Presidential Working Group report, which was brilliant and by far the most bullish and comprehensive report from any world government ever about digital assets. Great report. Not a ton of detail about this SBR. And I think this is one of the most interesting and fun questions. I think we know the government is ordered to not sell and also to figure out how to buy Bitcoin, right? In that same executive order, because it's called like the Strategic Bitcoin Reserve and Digital Asset Stockpile, they are actually prohibited from buying non-Bitcoin digital assets, but they can sell them if they want. So it's sort of like Bitcoin is in hold or buy only mode, and altcoins are in hold or sell only mode. Now, that's the order, right? Like, we know that it's actually tricky to determine which coins the government actually holds. Literally, how many are there? There's 93 U.S. attorney districts. Like, some of them may use a centralized service provider like the marshals to help dispose of them once they get to that point in a confiscation court case. And if they're not at that stage, then maybe they're not. I mean, I think there probably were like ledgers in like evidence lockers around the country to be accounted for, right? And then once you found what coins you think are there, like determining the current legal status, like who has the title to those coins? When will they be deemed finally forfeit to the government, right? Will they ever be, right? And then if they are finally forfeit, can the government, on the basis of an executive order alone, move them into a bucket that they call the SBR and that they believe they can hold? None of those are simple questions. And in fact, many of them, a prima facie analysis of the law would suggest they absolutely cannot take them and put them in the SBR. There are federal statutes about the disposition of finally forfeited assets. Typically, you have to go to victim compensation funds or to the agencies that right? So there's a lot of legal questions to be figured out. But we still, I mean, I think people in Bitcoin markets have been a little bit disappointed because we don't even have a number for how many coins the government thinks it has yet. It hasn't been said publicly. The order did require Treasury and Commerce to tell the White House the number, and also to tell the White House some ideas for budget neutral strategies to acquire them. The order doesn't require them to make it public, and they haven't. So there's some consternation, I think, in the Bitcoin market about that. And like, when are we going to know, or will we ever know? Or maybe they're not doing it at all, right? And people are getting sort of anxious about whether maybe it was all a lie, even, people wonder, right? And I don't think it is a lie. I think it's really complicated. I still think that by the end of the year, we'll hear some kind of formal announcement that some SBR actually has been created. I know that's I didn't say buy. I mean, I don't know if that's like really handicapping here. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent did say on television a couple weeks ago that he thinks the SBR is valued currently at 15 to 20 billion. And at the prices when he said it, that would be like 120 to 160,000 coins. I don't count that as the announcement. I think it was kind of a slip of the tongue, right? Like, he didn't and do we think that that's a number that they've decided they have final forfeit to, and they have the legal capability to move into an SBR? I think maybe he knows a number and he just calculated the value of it. I'm looking for something a bit more formal there, but that's one that I think the AI and data center stuff and energy stuff is much easier for the government to move along, and they are being very supportive. I think crypto regulation at the regulatory agencies with President Trump's appointees also pretty good and possible to move along. I think this SBR is like one of the most interesting questions here from the White House standpoint. Like, at some point, like, the president was very explicit many times, not just starting in Nashville, but then many times after that, and then in this order, and then at that roundtable, and right, like, at some point they've got to come out and say something explicit about it, and they haven't yet. So to me, I think this is actually bullish. I think this is a catalyst that has not yet occurred, and that I do expect to occur. It might not happen before the end of the year, but I think it definitely happens like next year, if not this year, where They finally say, like, look, we figured it out. These are the coins we think are ours. That's that for now. I think
Yeah,
I'm waiting for that.
I hope so. Well, so I want to zoom out a little bit and connect that to kind of monetary policy and where things are heading. Everybody is, talking about rate cuts and the short-term market effects of those. But, with the Genius Act, I mean, the Treasury Secretary said expanding demand for US debt via stablecoins is going to hopefully bring down borrowing costs. I think I conceptualize this as like having an SBR along with the gold reserves and all like the land and hard assets the government owns on the one side, giving, value, I guess, on the balance sheet in terms of assets on one side, and then more demand for the debt on the other side as a way to strengthen the dollar, as a way to kind of improve the economic health of the nation, I guess, is how I'm thinking about it. So with the government owning gold, Bitcoin, oil, land, all this stuff on the asset side, and then having the stablecoin side explode, does that thesis prove true? Is this real life? Or is it just fantasy, to quote Freddie Mercury? What do you think?
I think it's net supportive of dollar dominance, generally speaking. I don't know that as stablecoin specifically. I think, improving the asset side of the balance sheet is also should be supportive of a better balance sheet, right? But the thing is, when it comes to borrowing costs and rates, I don't think like having a bunch of Bitcoin is going to help like bring down rates. I think it's true that creating new distribution for dollars will probably help solidify the dollars I don't want to say dominance, but the dollar's longevity and permeation. It's kind of extremely geopolitical in that sense, and actually I think a highly brilliant subversive geopolitical play. It's kind of saying like at a time when foreign sovereigns increasingly or decreasingly want to own our debt, or they don't want to use our dollars, or you hear rumbles about like foreign currencies being used, or conglomerates of our adversaries banding together a BRICS currency or whatever, gold-backed currency. We've heard all these sort of rumors, all that hard to get off the ground. Like clearly the dollar has so much Lindy effect here that it's tough. They don't want to buy our debt. They don't want to trade in our dollars, right? India and China did a deal in rupees and renminbi. They didn't use the dollar, right? You see these headlines periodically. There's obviously demand worldwide from our adversaries to use fewer dollars, right? And to own less of our debt. And in that sense, we were kind of saying, you know what? You don't want to own our debt? You don't want to use our dollars? We're just going to put dollars on the smartphones of every one of your citizens. Like, it's a very subversive and powerful idea, I think, about expanding dollar influence. And that, as constructed and genius, if that happens and you see an enormous explosion in stablecoins, will create demand for treasuries. Specifically short dated treasuries, which by the way isn't really our problem. Like our problem is demand for long dated treasuries. So I don't think it actually will help that much with rates. I think the core problem with rates is that no one believes that we will ever solve our debt problem. And those chickens are finally come home to roost. Like the jig is up. No one buys it anymore. Like gold is at all-time highs. Like the world's net buying gold and net buying fewer treasuries, right? Like I think absent a serious change in fiscal policy, even lowering the Fed funds rate, I don't think is going to have a material impact, medium term on actual credit markets. I think you're going to see credit spreads widen in that spot. So I think one of the big things they talk about too for why President Trump and his administration want lower Fed rate is because they think mortgages will come down. I'm just not sure that they will come down that much, because mortgages are typically tied to the 10 and the 30 year, and those people don't want the debt. I think lowering, if anything, like the rates being higher makes the debt more attractive in an environment where people aren't buying it. So I think there's a real problem here, and it's more fiscal than debt related. And I don't see, look at the big, beautiful bill. We're about to get an injection of enormous amounts of stimulus, right? We're going to spend more, right? Like, so I don't see, I think stable coins are very powerful for extending the dollar. I think Bitcoin on the balance sheet or improving the balance sheet can also possibly help with our credit worthiness, possibly. But in the end, like, this is long-term stuff, and we're not making many long-term fiscal improvements that I think will actually really help the situation.
Yeah, getting down to that 3%. That's a GDP that Ray Dalio and Secretary Besant talk about.
333, right? That's what he's looking for. And remember when they came into office, they made the 10-year, that's our benchmark. Well, the 10-year has not come down. So it's not really working. Doesn't mean that, we're not bullish on America, obviously, but I think that that is unfortunately a problem that they need to solve to in a long-term basis, that there's no political will to solve on either side of that.
Yeah, it has to be a menu of things that all have to happen at once. There has to be spending cuts. There has to be revenue raising, which hopefully happens with economic growth. And then hopefully if the government is able to monetize a balance sheet, get more revenue sources, they're taking stakes in companies now.
I mean, we don't
So
want higher
right
tax,
away, we're trying to strengthen this side.
but you're right. We're so off sides in the budget and in the debt that simply cutting spending, frankly, won't be enough to rein in this thing. So you're right.
No, you need growth for
Yeah.
sure. Well, Zach, you had one more substantive question before we get into the fun part.
Yes, yeah. Before we switch over to the fun rapid fire questions, I came across a tweet and it was tagged to your talk that you gave, the great talk you gave at the Bitcoin Policy Summit in June, which I was there for. And the tweet that was accompanying your speech, it said, "History is longer than you think. The status quo, the establishment, the entrenched interests, they want you to believe history is complete, but revolutions happen and they happen more often than you think." What does that?
People are very myopic about history. Everyone probably always has, but in my experience in the contemporary world I live in today, everyone over indexes for the present, right? They think everything's is the way it's meant to be, that, or that change can only be incremental, right? And incremental change is a powerful way to get change, to be clear, but people forget that like major changes in the world happen all the time throughout history. So like, I think it's very easy when you tell somebody to think about, well, yeah, surely it was a major change when cars took over the horse and buggy. Everyone knows that was a major change. But if they were there during it, did they realize it when it was happening, right? And I think people tend not to, and they tend to think that it's something for the history books, but not something for today, right? And that's what I'm saying. History is longer than you think. Like history's not over yet. In fact, we're making history every day as a species. And I believe that Bitcoin in particular, as an example, is one of those things that will be looked back on as a major revolutionary change. Whereas maybe if you're in it day to day, it looks like speculation or a toy. There's a famous quote, I don't know who to attribute it to, but that innovation often starts by looking like a toy. At first it's Midjourney making an image. Later it's like AI, running everything, right? But like the first instantiations often look like little experiments or toys, or maybe it's speculation. Is it really the ushering in of a new global monetary asset, or is it just a bunch of degens speculating, right? Like, that's okay. I mean, think about the .com bubble. Like, they weren't wrong. Everyone was so excited about this revolutionary thing that they got way ahead of their skis, and it caused a decade of stock market stagnation. But they were right. They were correct that it was going to massively change the world. And so, yeah, it's just an idea. I think people think that change happens in history, but doesn't happen today. And in reality, every time that it's happened, people thought that. And every major change was fought by the status quo to prevent it. The status quo, whether it's just broadly the system, or if it's the elites or the people in power or entrenched interests, they always oppose revolution because revolution is disruptive to the status quo. It's the definition of it, right? And so, that status quo always wants you to believe that everything's in its right place. Things, systems are secure. Everything's been designed already. Surely you don't have a new idea. That is the inertia of the status quo, and it is something that society forces on people. You feel it when you walk around. You walk around in a city like New York, and you're like, oh, all these buildings have already been built. The subway lines have already been laid, right? Like, but the reality is that every change is disruptive. Every change flies in the face of that lie that the status quo tells you, and regular people make those changes all the time, or lead them, or cause them to occur all throughout history. So do not be disparaged. Plow forward and start a revolution, because it's totally possible. It happens all the time.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, thanks for expounding upon that. And it was a great talk that you gave there.
Thank you.
Okay. We'll stop talking about serious stuff for a moment. We'll have a new segment for when we have guests on the show. It'll be a sort of a lightning round Q&A. No serious questions, no right or wrong answers, just some fun questions. So first, who is your favorite athlete?
Man, I've got a couple. I'm from Boston originally. Paul Pierce, 34 on the Celtics, my favorite basketball player historically. I hate to just say it, but I also love Tom Brady. I grew up with Drew Bledsoe and before, and as a younger child, being devastated by constant underperformance. One time Bledsoe got to the Super Bowl with Brett Favre, and we got toasted by the Green Bay Packers. But then I did spend basically all of high school and college just winning constantly with Tom Brady. Love Tom Brady. And I'm going to say Tom Brady and Paul Pierce.
I took Eli with the Giants. Sorry about that.
Right. Those were two great Super Bowls, by the way, that the Giants beat the Patriots in. Both excellent games.
They were. Maybe you've answered the question, but who are your favorite sports teams?
Yes, Patriots, Celtics, Atlanta Tar Heels, Vanderbilt Commodores. Also like the Bruins and hockey teams and other sports. I would say also massive tennis fan. My wife played tennis growing up. We both played tennis. Our kids play tennis. Huge Ben Shelton fan these days.
And on the note of Vanderbilt, they are on a roll to start the season. I think they've scored like 45 points or something like that in each of their games. Do you think they can upset number 11 South Carolina this weekend?
I'm going to go ahead and say yes. What's the downside for me being wrong on this? Let's go Doris. I think it's possible. Yeah, they're having to do. They had a great season last year too. I mean, it fizzled a little bit, but remember it was the biggest upset of all time. They knocked out the number 1 seed, and then the students carried the goalpost 2.5 miles down and threw them in the river down there in Nashville. I don't think people realize how far that is. It's not like that far in like a car, but it's like you carried them for 2 miles. So yeah, go Doors.
And then, we've talked about your current job and what you've kind of done over the last decade or so. But if you weren't doing this, what would you want to do or be?
I mean, I sort of happened into a career in, at Fidelity Legal and later in securities law and compliance. Love public policy, like I know you guys do. Would love to, study political science in undergrad, right? Love, in fact, really specializing in an auspicious combination: campaign politics and political philosophy. So the sort of the nittiest of the grittiest, and the sort of the most, rubber meets the road. And then like the most esoteric was the thing. Maybe something in politics or policy, or maybe something in music.
Nice. I like it. I will vote for you if you want to run for anything. Next question. What is the last show you binge watched?
The last TV show I've been watching, The Foundation, the Isaac Asimov adaptation on Apple TV. I'm a big sci-fi fan. I think that's the last one.
Hobbies and hidden talents. We talked about rapping. I think that counts. If you could have a meal with one person from history, who would it be and why?
Can I instead of one, I actually have a good answer for this that I've thought of. So like think about like a 4 top, right? So it's like me, or a 5 top, me plus 4, right? In heaven or whatever. And there's so many good answers to this. Like, of course I could say like Jesus would be amazing, but I have an interesting one. I would say Robin Williams, Hunter S. Thompson, Anthony Bourdain, maybe we'll call it a 4 top, just put those 3. Oh, George Carlin. So it's a semi-iconoclastic comedy journalism kind of meeting, right? I think that'd be a good one.
Right. A couple suicides in there. It's a little dark.
One of my favorite American authors is Ernest Hemingway. What are you going to do?
Yeah. All right. Plug your Twitter handle real quick at Intangible Coins, right? And we just have a few minutes left. So let's get into our final game. Zach, you want to introduce this?
Sure. So we've got, we're all about new segments apparently today, but our final segment's a new game called What's the Headline? So I'll provide the context of an actual news story, and then each of us will supply a headline. So story number 1, LeBron James visited China on the Forever King tour on his 20th anniversary of touring Asia with Nike. And then he wrote a glowing review of China in a state-run newspaper. He wrote, "The enthusiasm and kindness of Chinese friends deeply touched me, and all I can do is give my all in every game to express my gratitude. I hope I can continue to contribute to the development of Chinese basketball." So this comes a few years after LeBron James sort of raged against a tweet by the former Rockets GM expressing support for Hong Kong. So LeBron James, this is the headline. LeBron James writing for state media. What's the headline? Brian?
Yes, and I found a meme for it, and it is Mao Zedong goes to China, and we got to throw up the picture of.
That's a good impression, Brian. I'm into that. I was
What do you
thinking Chairman LeBron, the people's champ.
And a little The Rock reference in there.
Exactly.
I did LeBron's China Charm Offensive, basketball star turns state scribe.
There you go. That's just a good headline.
It's very serious. Yeah, I can actually see that in print.
It's got alliteration. It's got a subheading.
I've been watching The Paper on Peacock, so I'm getting my journalism bona fides
Is that good? I'll
lifted
check
up a
it
little
out.
bit. It's good. All right, so we got two more, and then we can finally let you go. So story number 2, rapper 50 Cent, as the kids say, is hosting a new true crime series on Fox Nation. It's a 6-part series looking at murder mysteries so that viewers can, quote, experience the intensity of these investigations and the relentless work it takes to uncover the truth. So the first episode will look at a Maryland teacher who went missing and failed to show up for the first day of school. So 50 Cent hosting a murder show. What's the headline, Brian?
I went off his album cover and went with "Didn't Get Rich, Died Trying," because it's a murder show. So we got to throw up the graphic.
It's so good.
And I also apparently was in alliterative mood. So Curtis Jackson, the real name of the rapper, becomes Curtis Columbo. Rapper turns detective for hire.
I have many men suspected of murder.
Murder comedy.
Yes.
You get everything on this pod.
And, apparently these murder shows are very interesting for the ladies these days. So it'll be interesting to see what the sort of demographics are that tune into his show. All right. The final story. The Democrats, facing a crisis with working class voters, are recruiting candidates who, to quote one of them, are a little bit hairy, a little bit fat, and a little bit tattooed. So I just need to get some tattoos, and I would be a great candidate for
Target
for this.
demographic.
Yeah, the target demographic. So Democrats are recruiting the rugged guys. What
Did you
is
say fat, hairy?
Yeah, a little bit hairy, a little bit fat, and a little bit tattooed.
All right, no tattoos. I got no tattoos, so we're good.
That's what I was going to ask. I was going to say, it sounds like you. You are.
No tattoos though, so apparently they can't. I'm not the target.
Well, you are a rugged guy, though. I think you're rugged.
I am a little fat and hairy, though. I'll give them that. You know, what are you going to do?
I want the headline: to unbud light themselves, Democrats nominate the brawny paper towel guy, because that's pretty much who we're talking about.
With the rolled up flannel shirt and the beard. Yeah, that's good.
And I had forget wine moms. Democrats are now courting Mountain Dew dads.
How about Mountain Dew dads? Dude, Mountain Dew might be the most unhealthy drink in the history of the world. Is that right? Like, doesn't it like turn your insides radioactive green colored? I think it does.
Good. I like Diet Dew myself.
All right. What about this one? Forget hope and change. Democrats try beard and belly.
Yes. Nailed it. I love it. All right. More bearded, fat, tattooed guys running for office. What could go wrong? We have had a very long, in-depth conversation today. We hope you all enjoyed it. Thanks for joining us. Remember to follow me on X at MorganSternNJ. Follow Alex at Intangible Coins. And like and subscribe. Follow us on Rumble, YouTube, Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your pods. And we'll see you next time, everybody, on the Peer-to-Peer Policy Pod. Thanks very much.